Hello everyone, welcome to another session of C++ programming. Till last week we were looking at the different aspects of C++ programming, and then we got introduced to the object-oriented programming. So right now we are going to build upon the concept we learned last week. So last week we looked at how to write a class, we wrote an object, we talked about constructors, we looked at private versus public, methods and also fields. We also looked at how to create an object and call public versus private members. So the idea is get a basic understanding of object-oriented programming and then deep dive. So today what we are going to be looking at is look at a little deeper at the concepts here. So we have a class. We talked about encapsulation and abstraction last week. So basically, encapsulation is where the class is self-sufficient. All of the processing happens within the class, right? So we looked at how we could protect and maintain the integrity of our members by keeping them private. So we have length and width here as private. We have the color and border color as public, because the length and width are the basic defining guidelines for any rectangle. So we want to make sure that we protect that. So we made it private. So the only way these two variables can be accessed is from within the class. A constructor can access it, methods can access it, both public and private. So other than that, there is no access to these two variables. So now we are going to be looking at how can we make this available to outside of the class without compromising the integrity of the data. So what we do for that is we call them as getters and setters. So before we go into it, I just want to go into what I mean by opening it up. So this is a class. So in this is our class called rectangle. And then here's our main method, right? So this is the differentiation here. So we have private length. So what we want to do is from main we cannot access length. So even though we want to protect the integrity, it would be very inconvenient if we cannot change it from main. So we want to be able to do two things. We want to be able to access the data, which is get, and we want to change the data, which is set. So we want to be able to do these two manipulations. So the way we are going to allow that to happen, we want the best of both worlds. We want our data to be safe, but we also want to control how that can be accessed. So we don't want to open this gate up, but we want to give them another access. So we want to go through only get can get the value and set can set the value of this data. Okay, so that is how we want to control it. We do not want to give up that control. We don't want to give up the control, so we want to be able to use the public methods inside the rectangle class or any class to be able to access this variable. So these are special ones called the getters and setters. So getters and setters. So what we are going to be doing is a getter will look like get, and then it will have the name of the variable len. Set will have len. So note that it's the exact same name as the variable name, except the first letter is uppercase. That's the only difference. So think about it. When you do get, it has to return a value. So this has to be of type integer. A set does not have to return a value, but it has to take a value. So this will be void, and here it will be taking an integer x. So that is how we are going to be defining these methods. So what happens from the main is, instead of accessing length, you will access get length. You will call get length and set length, and they will follow the same thing as object dot get whatever, object dot set whatever. Okay, so now let's go back to the code. Here what we want to do is I have constructors here and methods here. In between I'm going to be adding setters, getters and setters. So I'm going to be adding a method, a get method and a set method. So I'm going to say int get len. So this is going to be really simple. It is just going to return the value of length. Then I'm going to be saying void set len int x. So it's going to take x and set the value of the len to x. So these are the two methods I want to define. This is the simplest way to write a getter and setter. Now what we are going to do is, from this method here, let's use R2 as an example. So let's do R2.getLen. So we get the value of the length and we put it in a variable called length. Okay, now we want to do a cout. Okay, so now we want to set the value. That is the second step. So we want to set length. So we want to now call r2.setLen, and then we want to send here 45. After that, we still want to do cout by doing a get. So the only way we can access is by get and set. So let's just do this as len. We cannot redefine a variable. That's why I took the int out. Now let's see. So first I'm just getting the length. Whatever was set by the constructor, that's what we are going to get, which should be 2. So the first length is 2. You can see that. The second length is going to be 45. That is what I tried to set. So I set the length to 45 in line 62, and then I did a get len. Now the length value came and it got stored in length, and now I'm displaying it as 45. So that is the basic way of writing a getter and setter. Okay, so the other reason why we use getters and setters is so we can enforce some validations. What do I mean by that? So for example, there cannot be a rectangle with a negative length. So we do not do the validation anywhere. All the validation that has to do with that particular class has to be kept within the class. And that is when it gets propagated anytime an object is created. We do not want to create those validations in the main method, because the main.cpp is going to be the calling, what do you call it? It's basically a user of that class rectangle. It is just going to create objects. You don't want to put all the class validations inside those users. You want to keep it within the class itself because we want it to be properly encapsulated. So what we want to do here is, your set method is a great place to validate the input before you set that as the data. So x is the value. We want to validate x first. Does x have a valid value? If x is valid, then we want to copy the value into length. So let's check. So negative value is a no. If x is less than 0, we want to ignore this operation. Otherwise, we want to set the length. Let's run this code now. There are no errors. Now we want to actually send a bad data. So we set the length to 45. That worked fine. So let's try to set the length to a -4. See what happened. The value should not change from 45. So you can see that we get a message saying ignored. So -4 is a bad value, so it was ignored, and then the length is retained as 45. So not only do we have a way to access the private variables in a very secure manner from the user perspective, right? We are exposing those private variables to be accessed and modified outside of the class, but we are doing it in a very responsible way that it does not compromise the integrity of our data, and that is important. The second reason why we are using the getters and setters is so we can validate the data before we overwrite our member variables with that data. So for example, if we have a rectangle of length -4, -2, it really is not possible to have a rectangle that way. Mathematically we can write it, but it makes no sense because a negative value for a length is just simply wrong. So if you're going to have like bad values like that in your database, then it compromises the integrity of your entire database, and nobody would want to use that data anymore, right? For example, Google, because of all the data, the integrity that they have with Google is why they are the most sought after information giant. If they're going to be giving you like wrong address whenever you try to search for where Starbucks is, and they give you a non-existent address, you're not going to be using Google anymore. It's similar to that. So the integrity of the data is absolutely important, and that is why we encapsulate the data. We secure the data by making some of the sensitive information as private, but we also want to think about the convenience of the users, in which case we expose it, but cautiously. So we are creating a wrapper on top of our variables, which is the getters and setters. And we are also making sure that we are validating the data before we modify the data itself. So that is what we saw here. So if you go into your content this week, there is a lab. So we are going to be taking the lab you did last week, copy that over into a new lab, lab 10, and then you're going to be writing getter and setter for 3 different variables: weight, height, and age. And then the validation information is given there. So that's what you have for this week's assignment. I'll be updating the video and demo code here. And then these are the 3 documents that I want you to take a look at as reference materials. Hope this makes sense. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me, and I'll be more than happy to help out. Have a great day.